Recently, there was a documentary series called Quiet on Set released, about the dark world of Nickelodeon sitcoms. One of the revelations in particular involved the conduct of a producer by the name of Brian Peck. It was quickly discovered that Peck was a pen pal of the 1970s serial killer John Wayne Gacy. This has very little to do with the rest of this video, apart from the fact that it's topical and resulted in the search down the rabbit hole that we're about to go on. This is not a cheerful video, and for obvious reasons, consider yourself to have been warned. Hey, hold on. Why are we talking about John Wayne Gacy all of a sudden? I thought this was going to be about the guy from the last time, like the eyebrow guy, Michael Aquino. Because I need to give a bunch of background information, and I need to involve, like, a bunch of characters in this, and, like, so I can dramatically tie them in later. Like, hush. Between the years of 1973 and 1978, a Chicago man by the name of John Wayne Gacy proved the stereotypes about clowns to be correct by becoming, up to that point, the most prolific serial killer in American history, immediately beating the previous record held by the Houston mass murders. However, Gacy was something of an outlier amongst serial killers. While serial killers typically tend to be antisocial or asocial, drifters, uneducated or poorly educated, aggressive, and frequently unemployed or underemployed, Gacy was widely loved by his community, due in part to performing as a clown on holidays and at, birthday parties. He was civic-minded, he was a college graduate, somewhat passive, successful. He was, a manager of several KFC franchises in Iowa. Later, he owned a small business running a company in Chicago called PDM Contractors. Gacy was also a very active member of an organization known as the Junior Chamber of Commerce, or the JCs. This was a leadership and politics organization targeted at young professionals to facilitate networking and honing political skills. Famous JC's alumni include Bill Clinton, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, serial killer Edmund Kemper, and Bill Gates. The Chicago JC's chapter is known for having a strong connection to Chicago politics and the Chicago Democratic Party, of which Gacy was also involved, at least at an organizational level. However, this all goes to show you that you cannot trust clowns, because he sexually assaulted, sometimes tortured, and then killed about 33 young men and buried the majority of them in his crawl space. In prison, after his arrest, he claimed to not have operated alone, and said that he had help with the logistics of the killings, and that he had recorded videos of many of the murders for distribution. In addition, at least one of the murders took place while he was confirmed to have been out of town. Now, unsurprisingly, it's pretty hard to argue your way out of finding even one dead body in your crawl space, let alone more than 30. So the official stance on these murders is that Gacy acted alone with no accomplices. The good old lone wolf serial killer pornographer. Let's turn our attention now to Houston, Texas, and the mass murders of the same name. Between 1970 and 1973, at least 28 boys and young men were kidnapped, tortured, sexually assaulted, and murdered by this guy right here, Dean Corll. Corll was born in Indiana and moved between Indiana and Texas several times throughout his childhood and adolescence. In 1962, at the age of 22, he returned to Houston, where he would live for the remainder of his life. For the next 8 years, there's little to note of Corll's activities apart from reports of, sexually inappropriate advances in behavior towards young male employees of his candy company. But in 1970, though, Corll would crank up the dial on the murder meter with the aid of teenage accomplices Elmer Wayne Henley and David Owen Brooks. For every victim that they led to Corll's apartment, Corll paid them $200, or about $1,600 adjusted for inflation. Well, for $1,600 I can understand. When questioned by his accomplices, like what the boys were for, Corll told them that he was part of a ring based out of Dallas that bought and sold boys, and trafficked in drugs and snuff films. Following this revelation, the reaction of Henley and Brooks was more or less like, yeah, okay, whatever. Corll also claimed to the pair that he wasn't doing the killing, he was just selling them to people to be killed. Which, I'll be honest, is kind of like a weird thing to lie about. It's not better. It's not an improvement, but before long, Henley and Brooks began to assist with the murders themselves, too, which I guess isn't terribly surprising. Corll's killing spree only came to an end after he was himself killed by Henley. Henley brought over two of his friends to Corll's apartment to hang out and smoke pot and drink beer and sniff paint, but wound up enraging Corll due to the fact that one of the friends he brought was a girl. Henley explained that his female friend just needed to get out of her house for the night because she was afraid of her drunk father, which seemed to calm Corll down a little bit. God damn, her dad must have been drunk to have it be preferable to have her be babysit by Dean Corll. But anyways, just to skip to the relevant bits, Henley wound up shooting Corll, confessing to be an accomplice to the murders, relaying what Corll had told him about the Dallas ring. etc. The police initially did not believe Henley about the other victims, though, and only wound up looking into what he was saying after he was able to recall the names of 3 missing Houston area boys. Now, Corll was posthumously charged with the murders of 28 people, although Brooks and Henley both insisted that there were more victims whose bodies hadn't been recovered. However, the Houston Police Department wound up calling off the search for bodies after the 26th and 27th bodies were found tied together. This is believed to be due to the fact that up until this point, the U.S. KDR record was held by Juan Corona with a 25-1, and once that was, once they'd beaten that, it's like, okay, fuck the rest of them. This was highly criticized due to the fact that no fewer than 42 boys and young men vanished from the Houston area between 1970 and 1973. Meanwhile, in Dallas, on August 13th, 1973, only 5 days after Corll's death, police raided the apartment of a certain John Norman after receiving a tip about a possible homosexual prostitution ring. John Norman was at this point 46 and had already accumulated a pretty sizable pervert rap sheet, having been arrested in Houston for sexual assault in 1954, 1956, 1960, in California for sexual assault in 1963, and in 1970 was convicted on federal charges of distributing obscene material and sentenced to 15 months in prison. Following his release in 1971, he set up the Odyssey Foundation, the sex trafficking ring for which he was being raided, in media res. Following the raid on his apartment, police found photos and contact info for teenage boys, along with catalogs intended for distribution to clients. These included photographs of the boys, referred to in the literature and also hereafter in the video as fellows, that you could pay to sponsor in exchange for 2 to 3 days of company. Additionally, the Dallas police found a client list of his, consisting of a filing cabinet full of about 30,000 pink index cards, with between 50 and 100,000 names of clients, along with their contact info and sexual preferences. These were then passed on to the State Department for further investigation. Oh, so they went on and, arrested all the clients sponsoring the fellas, right? Haha. No, of course not. They declared the index cards irrelevant to the investigation and then burned them. As a side note, in 1977, a Dallas police lieutenant named Harold Hancock testified that the client list included high-ranking government officials and prominent public figures and celebrities. So I guess they've just always been like that. As a result of the raid, Norman was charged with possession of marijuana, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and conspiracy to commit sodomy. He was then released on bail and immediately fled to the great state of Illinois, in particular Chicago. Now, it seems like I'm jumping around here, but bear with me. These threads connect. In 1975, there was an investigation undertaken in California into a potential distribution network for, how should I put this? The worst type of film you can watch. 8mm starring Nicolas Cage? Close enough. What wound up being uncovered by the bust included video taken of the torture and murder of at least 11 of the victims of Dean Corll, mixed in with an enormous array of photographs, film reels, film negatives, contact sheets, Polaroids, slides. Now, this isn't important, but there's something darkly funny about the concept of someone choosing to document a murder on slide film. So does that mean, the operation has a darkroom and, a film development tech? You can't take that to a lab.
I told him you got a meter for the blood, not for the skin. Now I gotta do this shit again, god damn it.
Anyways, this adds quite a lot of credibility to Corll's claims of a Dallas-based operation dealing in human trafficking and distribution of snuff films. Back to Norman. After fleeing Dallas and moving to Chicago, he began living under a different name, Steve Gurwell, because it was the 70s and you used to just be able to do that. Following getting that sorted out, he immediately went and molested at least 10 teenage boys. By November, and keep in mind, he left in August, late August, early September. So by November, the cops were, on the lookout following multiple reports of a Steve Gurwell moving in and starting to molest everyone around him. Now, on the 14th of November, Norman was arrested and charged with 5 counts of indecent liberties with a child and 8 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and taken to Cook County Jail. From what I can find, a little more than 2 years later, he had his bail of $36,000 paid by someone in California and was released awaiting trial. Now, I'm going to take the next 2 paragraphs from Wikipedia verbatim because, they're accurate for once. In December 1976, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison and sent to Pontiac Correctional Center. Shortly before he was released on bail, Norman began his next sex operation, the Delta Project, like from the name of the video, and began publishing a newsletter called Hermes. From Cook County Jail, Norman sent out 3 newsletters using the jail's printing press, claiming the Delta Project aimed to provide educational, travel, and self-development opportunities for qualified young men of character and integrity, and that Delta dorms were being established across the U.S., with each dorm having 2 to 4 cadets, overseen by a Don. Let me repeat that. He was publishing the kid sex newsletter and catalog from prison. Good God. Anyway, police alleged that the cadets were underage male prostitutes recruited in Chicago. Yeah, no shit. In a May 1977 interview with the Tribune, Norman denied that Project Delta was sexual in nature and claimed to have sent the newsletter to over 7,000 people. At the time of the interview, police said the newsletter had 5,000 subscribers and grossed over $300,000 per year. That's a lot in 1970s money. And also, if it's not sexual, why are people buying a newsletter? You usually, have to unsubscribe from those. You can't even give those away. Norman was paroled in the fall of 1977, but was arrested again in Chicago in June 1978 for having sex with 2 underage boys from a local foster home and taking pornographic pictures of both. One of the boys informed investigators that Norman was in the process of selling him to a client, and Norman was simply waiting for his plane ticket. Norman was accused of refounding the Delta Project, now called the Creative Corps and MC Publications. Norman was accused of refounding the Delta Project, now called the Creative Corps and MC Publications, after being released from prison and operating it out of his apartment on West Wrightwood Avenue, allegedly sending photos of the... Oh, fuck, that scared me. Allegedly sending photos of the boys to a Don in Canada. In a raid of the apartment, 20,000 more pink index cards, or possibly 50 to 100,000, containing the names of customers, were found. In 1977, while Norman was still imprisoned, the victim who testified against Norman, leading to his conviction, was stabbed to death while walking home. The primary person of interest in this murder is the next moving part to come into play, a man by the name of Philip Paskey. Paskey was a career criminal and sex offender known for his proclivity towards violence. He worked as the manager of MC Publications' mailing operation and took over the whole operation temporarily while Norman was in prison. Paskey was described as being Norman's closest associate and second in command. He was also described as being, quite tall, with bad skin and a pockmarked face, as well as having a tendency to cross-dress. He also had a tendency to inexplicably not go to prison, despite a very long criminal record, with charges for things ranging from drug possession to assault, to illegal fireworks, to assault, to assault, to assault, to murder. It doesn't appear that he ever actually spent any time in prison. Even for the murder charge, which he successfully pled down to a robbery charge. He robbed him of his aliveness. He was only sentenced to 5 years probation, so yeah, that's kind of weird. Alright, now back to our buddy Pennywise. Recall that John Wayne Gacy ran a contracting business called PDM Contractors. There are a couple of interesting names that pop up when you look into his employees. Number 1, Michael Rossi. Rossi was an employee of his that was implicated in his testimony as a possible accomplice to the murders and who admitted to helping dig the trenches under his house used to bury the bodies. Rossi's maternal grandfather, however, was the famously or infamously mob-connected Chicago alderman Vito Mazzullo. Corruption? In Chicago politics? Given Gacy's strong ties to the Chicago Democratic Party, this is an interesting connection, given the possibility of mob involvement in distribution of content. Next up, let's look at another one of Gacy's employees, one Philip Paskey. Oh, from a minute and 38 seconds ago. Yep, Philip Paskey was not only employed by PDM Contractors, he also lived with Gacy, and was reportedly one of his closest friends. Additionally, according to witness testimony, when together with Gacy, Paskey was the one calling the shots and seemed to be in charge. Alright, now on to what you've been waiting for. The man of the hour, or at least the man of the previous video, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino. I touched on the Franklin scandal a bit, but let's take a quick look at Johnny Gosch, a missing boy whose kidnapping was allegedly orchestrated by Michael Aquino. Paul Bonacci, who won a $1 million civil suit against Lawrence King, pointed to Aquino as the supposed ringleader of the operation and eventually wound up meeting with Gosch's parents to provide them with information relating to the kidnapping of their son. Specifically relevant here is that one of the people involved with the actual kidnapping itself was a man by the name of Troy. Let's hear his description of Troy, according to the court testimony. Interesting. That rings a bit of a bell here. Let's take a look at a composite police sketch of Troy from the investigation of a different kidnapping in which he was believed to have taken part, and that Bonacci immediately and very confidently picked out of a lineup. Huh. Looks like Philip Paskey. Oh, from like a minute and 38 seconds ago. Okay, let's move on to the last and, quite frankly, weirdest piece of the puzzle. We have an explanation for how Gacy may have been connected to the mob. We have an explanation for how Gacy was connected to Norman. We have proof that Gacy was connected to Paskey, proof that Corll was connected to Norman. But is there any connection that Norman had to the Dallas mob? Well, let's take a look at one of Norman's rental properties and see if there's any notable Dallas mobsters who lived there. God damn it! Yeah, that Jack Ruby. Turns out, Jack Ruby was a pretty well-known Dallas area mobster, having connections to both the Dallas and Chicago mob, owning a nightclub and having a reputation for being able to put people in contact with those who can supply what they wanted, whether it be drugs or fellows. Alright, so where was John Norman at the time of this? Oh, Dallas, I guess that makes sense. Let's see, did Ruby make any notable trips near the end of 1962? Oh, Houston. Awesome. When did Corll move there? Oh, of course, a couple months earlier in 1962. Side note, he also made a stop through New Orleans on the way, which is repeatedly referenced in the Paskey FOIA files as being mentioned in the same breath as Chicago, Dallas, and Houston in regards to this trafficking ring, but I don't really know what the deal is with that. I'm still looking into that. Alright, so this gets into the area of just conjecture at this point, but I wonder if there's anything notable that Jack Ruby did that he would prefer to go to jail for and be known for, and not talk about ever, as compared to going to jail for some other things that he did and being known for those things. It seems like a pretty good way to ensure that someone sticks to the story if you just find someone where the reality of what they actually did was notably less popular. So, what happened to the various involved parties? Where are they now? Well, Gacy was arrested in 1978 and executed by lethal injection in 1994. Dean Corll was killed at the scene of his crimes. Corll's accomplices, Brooks and Henley, were given life sentences. Jack Ruby went on to do something unrelated and then got hit with the cancer ray before he had a chance to testify. John Norman would continue to keep distributing the same sort of material throughout the 80s before being arrested again in 1987. In 1999, the state of California declared Norman a sexually violent predator and committed him to a Atascadero State Hospital with a statement from his psychiatrist saying, "John is an unrepentant adult male sex offender who, in my opinion, will go to his grave without any remorse for what he had done." He remained at Atascadero until 2008, when he was released. Now, what he did next might shock you. He was released and immediately went and started trying to download illegal pornography, and posted a classified ad seeking a young male roommate for companionship and sex, and got caught passing a sexually inappropriate note to a young-looking male grocery store clerk. Following this, he was recommitted to Coalinga State Hospital, where he died 2 years later. Philip Paskey never saw the inside of a prison cell and died in Chicago in 1998, with little known about the circumstances. Anyways, I don't really know where to go from here other than that this is a weird, sad, fucked up story, like and subscribe.
Between the 1970s and 80s, the unveiling of numerous child trafficking rings took place. Unfortunately, there were also many children who died at the hands of serial killers during this time, including killers whose names are still remembered to this day. What is not commonly discussed is the possibility of an interconnection between these serial killings and the large networks of child trafficking that occurred within the same time period. In 2011, at the age of 83, a man named John David Norman died while in state custody. Although not much is known about Norman's childhood and teenage years, he spent much of his later life in and out of prison for multiple offenses as a sexually violent predator and pedophile. Throughout his life, he used a number of different aliases, including John Paul Norman, Steve Gerwell, Alan Hitchcock, and several others. Many of Norman's crimes involved the distribution of child pornography and sex trafficking. However, Norman's access to a wide network of both clientele and children, as well as his alleged ties to serial killers Dean Corll and John Wayne Gacy, positioned Norman as the centerpiece of a greater conspiracy. Norman was arrested twice in Houston in 1954 and 1956 for sexual assault, but it's unknown if he was convicted at the time. The first official records of Norman's convicted sex crimes began in 1960, when Norman was convicted of sexual assault in California in 1963. A few years later, in 1970, Norman was convicted in federal court for sending obscene literature through the mail. He received a 15-month prison sentence for the federal charge. After serving a sentence, records indicate that this was only the beginning of his mission to establish a nationwide network of homosexual prostitution and pedophilia. In the early 1970s, an organization called the Odyssey Foundation was grooming teenage boys and young men to be trafficked to clients across the country. The organization referred to these boys as fellows and photographed them for booklets that were advertised to, quote, sponsors, who would then choose and pay for their company. The fellows were trafficked across the country to meet and stay with the sponsors for 1 to 3 days on average, before traveling to the next sponsor. At some point, a man in San Francisco tipped authorities about the organization. On August 13th, 1973, it was John David Norman's apartment at 3716 Corll Avenue that Dallas police raided based on this tip. During the raid, police seized booklets bearing the name International, which contained photographs and contact information of the teenage boys and young men, or the fellows. Police also seized 30,000 index cards listing between 50,000 and 100,000 clients located in 35 US states. The amount of confiscated material was enough to fill a pickup truck. As profound as this discovery was, what makes it even more astonishing is the fact that following the transfer of the index cards to the government, they were ultimately destroyed by the State Department. Some consider this to be a significant cover-up. In May 1977, Dallas Police Lieutenant Harold Hancock told the Chicago Tribune that prominent public figures and federal employees were among the names found in Norman's client list. State Department Counselor Matthew Nemetz confirmed that the department indeed received the cards and destroyed them after determining them to be, quote, not relevant to any fraud case concerning a passport. In the end, Norman was charged with possession of marijuana, conspiracy to commit sodomy, and contributing to the delinquency of a juvenile. He was released on bail, after which he fled to Homewood, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, in late 1973, and began using the name Steve Gurwell. It was around this time, in 1973, that news reports indicated that police were investigating possible ties between Norman and a serial killer named Dean Corll. Corll's family had previously owned a candy factory in Houston Heights, and he had been known to give free candy to local children, which earned him the nicknames the Candyman and the Pied Piper. During his activity between 1970 and 1973, it is said that Corll murdered a minimum of 28 teenage boys and young men between the ages of 13 and 20 in Houston and Pasadena, Texas. These crimes became widely known as the Houston Mass Murderers, with the victims collectively given the group name the Lost Boys. Dean Corll did not work alone. In 1967, Corll befriended a boy named David Owen Brooks, who was 12 years old at the time. Brooks initially became part of a small crowd of youths that spent time at Corll's candy factory. and even joined Corll on regular trips he took to South Texas beaches. Brooks claimed that Corll was the first adult male who did not mock his appearance. Whenever Brooks told Corll he needed cash, Corll gave him money. But over time, Corll's urges led him to gradually groom Brooks into developing a sexual relationship where Corll would pay him with cash or gifts in exchange for pleasure. In December 1970, Brooks entered Corll's apartment unannounced. Corll was sexually assaulting 2 teenage boys who were strapped to a 4-poster bed. Brooks was promised a car in return for his silence, and he accepted. Corll later purchased a green Chevrolet Corvette for Brooks and admitted to murdering 2 boys. He then offered Brooks $200 for any boy he could lure to Corll's apartment. Brooks accepted his offer and officially became his accomplice. In high school, a boy named Elmer Wayne Henley had become friends with David Brooks. The two often played together, and Henley eventually became aware that Brooks spent a lot of his free time with an older man. By the winter of 1971, Brooks had lured at least 6 teenage boys to Corll's various addresses, although Henley had no knowledge of Brooks' activities with Dean Corll. It was around this time that Brooks decided to introduce Henley to Corll, no doubt intending for Henley to become Corll's next victim. However, it seems that Corll saw potential in Henley. Instead of killing him, they began spending time together. It's quite possible that, by this time, Henley may have already connected the dots. He had noticed a pattern of disappearances that were occurring in his hometown. Corll told Henley that he belonged to an organization based in Dallas which recruited young boys for a child sex slavery ring, and offered Henley the same fee as Brooks, $200 for any boy that he could lure to Corll's apartment. On August 8, 1973, Henley brought a potential victim named Timothy Curley to Corll's home, claiming that they were going to a party. Before Corll was able to confine Curley, the pair left Corll's home to buy some sandwiches. Upon returning, Corll noticed that they had brought with them a 15-year-old girl named Rhonda Williams. Corll was furious and told Henley in private that he had, quote, ruined everything. However, Corll waited before acting. Once the teenagers had fallen asleep from a night of drinking and smoking, he bound and gagged all of them. Henley pleaded for his life and promised to participate in the torture and killing if Corll released him. Corll agreed and untied Henley. Behind Corll's back, Henley took the pistol and ordered Corll to stop. However, Corll did not listen, and Henley ended up shooting him 6 times, killing him. 2 years after these events, police investigations would reveal pictures depicting 11 of Corll's victims during a raid on a child prostitution ring. This, among other details, led to the possibility of a connection between John Norman's Odyssey Foundation and Dean Corll's killings. Mere months after the Corll case became news, Norman left Texas. Was the publicity a contributing factor to Norman's decision to move? Corll also had many addresses, money to buy Brooks a car, and money to pay the boys for each victim. This indicated the possibility of an additional income source outside of his job as an electrician. Was he taking pictures of the boys before murdering them and selling the pictures to the Odyssey Foundation as CP? These are questions that remained unanswered. But even so, the possibility of a link between these two cannot be discarded. Returning to John Norman's activities, it was mentioned that after his release in Dallas, Norman fled to Homewood, Illinois, and went by the name Steve Gurwell. On November 14th, 1973, Norman was arrested and charged with 5 counts of indecent liberties with a child and 8 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. in less than 3 months, Norman had sexually abused 10 teenage boys. 3 years later, in the spring of 1976, Norman was bailed out of Cook County Jail for $36,000 by an unknown person in California. He was still awaiting trial on charges for his crimes in Homewood. In December of the same year, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison and sent to Pontiac Correctional Center. However, before he was released on bail from Cook County Jail, he had already started his next mission. Using the jail's printing press, he published a newsletter called Hermes. This newsletter was for a new plan, which he called the Delta Project. According to Norman, the Delta Project aimed to, quote, provide educational, travel, and self-development opportunities for qualified young men of character and integrity. The newsletter claimed that Delta dorms were being established across the U.S., with each dorm having 2 to 4 cadets overseen by a Don. Though it was alleged that the cadets were underage male prostitutes recruited in Chicago, Norman denied that Project Delta was sexual in nature. Police later investigated and determined that the newsletter had 5,000 subscribers and grossed over $300,000 per year. Norman was paroled in 1977, but less than a year later, in June 1978, he was arrested again in Chicago for having sex with 2 underage boys from a local foster home and taking pornographic pictures of both. One of the boys told investigators that they were going to be sold to a Canadian Don, and that Norman had been waiting for plane tickets. Following the raid on Norman's apartment, police found cameras, pornographic material, and tens of thousands of pink index cards with the names of customers and their sexual preferences. The index cards contain names from every state and some foreign countries, with some cards containing pictures of the customers. Norman had been accused of refounding the Delta Project, the crime for which he had already been sentenced for 4 years, except this time, he had given the operation a new name: the Creative Corpse and MC Publications. He was charged with 2 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor and violation of his probation. A few years later, from his rural home and a nearby motel in Pennsylvania, Norman produced and released yet another publication of CP, a magazine called Handy Andy. He exploited at least 20 teenage boys from the area, enticing them with drugs and alcohol, and taking pictures of them engaged in various sex acts. Norman fled from Pennsylvania after his home was raided again, but was eventually captured in Bolingbrook, Illinois in October 1984. In 1985, he was released on bail, and he quickly fled once again. This process of being arrested and released and repeating his crimes continued throughout the years until 1999, when he was declared a sexually violent predator and was detained indefinitely at a Tuscadero State Hospital. He was eventually released from a Tuscadero to the rural town of Boulevard, California, under strict conditions. However, on February 2nd, 2009, Norman violated these conditions. As a result of these offenses, in March 2009, Norman was ordered back into state custody at Coalinga State Hospital, where he died 2 years later. Shockingly, Norman was never convicted for sex trafficking. Around the same time that Norman had been active, there was another serial killer going rampant in Chicago, and you may have heard of this one. He was known as the Killer Clown, due to his routine of dressing up as a clown prior to becoming a serial killer. He went by the name John Wayne Gacy, and there are numerous hints of possible connections between Gacy and Norman's Delta Project. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy had raped, tortured, and murdered at least 33 teenage boys and young men in Norwood Park Township, near Chicago, Illinois. all of his murders were committed inside his ranch-style house. His killing methods were not original. Typically, he would lure a victim to his home and trick them into donning handcuffs on the pretext of demonstrating a magic trick. He later told police that he got the idea for his torture board from Elmer Wayne Henley, the same Elmer Wayne Henley who was Dean Corll's accomplice. Gacy owned a construction company called PDM Contractors. Much of PDM Contractors' workforce consisted of high school students and young men, and it was claimed that Gacy's victims would often be lured under the premise of a job at PDM. This company establishes a clear link between Gacy and Norman's Delta project through one man named Philip Paskey. Paskey was described as blonde, tall, skinny, with pock marks on his face, and often dressed as a woman. He was also a known accomplice of John Norman during his time running the Delta project. This connection became apparent when it was discovered that the two shared a P.O. box that was used for the distribution of Norman's newsletters. It also turns out that at one point in time, Philip Paskey also worked for Gacy's construction company, as evidenced by several pieces of paperwork, including payment receipts made from the company to Paskey. Aside from the paperwork, Gacy was once recorded in prison having a conversation, where he vents his frustration about being the only one to be convicted of the crimes. In the conversation, Gacy mentions 3 other names: Cram and Rossi, 2 other employees from PDM Contractors, as well as Paskey.
Those are the people that keys to the house and shit. Well, aside from the 12 keys, we already know that Rossi, Cram, Paskey, and Norman were involved in the case. And you know something what's funny? These son of a bitches know it too. And what does Closers Act do?
Gacy claimed that all of them had keys to his house.
David Cram, Rossi, and Paskey all had keys to the house. In fact, they used the house when I wasn't in town. And none of them got locked up. Nope, they're still free.
Doesn't this sound familiar? I mean, a shared house with a number of youths, or cadets, supervised by a Don. Is it possible that Gacy's house was actually one of the Delta dorms that had been advertised in Norman's newsletters? At least 2 victims believed to have been murdered by Gacy had last been seen alive close to where Norman lived, leading to further speculation of a possible connection between Norman's Delta project and Gacy's killings. In a 1992 interview, Gacy claimed that Norman and the Delta project were producing snuff films of young boys, possibly including some of Gacy's victims. Had some of Dean Corll's victims also been filmed and sent to the Delta project? And was the Delta project paying for these films and distributing them around the country? A lot remains unknown, but Gacy's testimony surely raises a number of questions on the matter. Gacy remained adamant that someone else had performed killings in his house. Given his connection to Paskey, it's hard to ignore these claims, since Paskey is also a known killer. Ultimately, Gacy was convicted for 33 murders. At the time, this was the largest number of homicides by a single individual in the United States legal history. On March 13, 1980, Gacy was sentenced to death. He was executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994.
I'm Mr. Obsidian. Prepare yourself for the Man of Black.